All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Visual Sound webinar regarding STEM at home. My name is Dana Witzel, and I'm an account manager on the education team. Our presenter today is Corey Freed. She is the educational consultant at Visual Sound. She is a former classroom teacher and certified in both Google and Microsoft. We'll be sharing some information after the call today. So if you could put your email information, your contact information in the chat box so we can follow up with some resources for you after the call. Okay, Corey, go ahead.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. As Dana said, my name is Corey Freed. I am the educational consultant for Visual Sound, and today's session is called STEM Projects, that students can do at home. So we're going to talk about what STEM is. We're going to talk about what kind of things your students can do because, as you know, in the classroom, you might be using things like 3D printers and robotics and all these different products, but the kids don't necessarily have this stuff at home. So what can we do to help encourage that problem solving and project-based learning when we're not really sure what the students are going to have access to? So the first thing I want to recommend is something that I feel very strongly about this when it comes to projects in school. And the thing is that when you are doing a project with your students, you want it to be open-ended. If every student gives you the exact same project, and let's face it, we've all walked down the hallway and seen 50 of the exact same final project, then it's not really a project. It's more of a recipe. Unless you're a home ec teacher, sorry, family and consumer science teacher, that's not necessarily what you want to see. You want them to be creative. You want them to be original. And so that's one of the biggest things that I always kind of fought for in my own classroom was allowing the kids that chance to use their imagination and present the material in a way that was authentic to them. So one of the things that I always encouraged for my students was journaling. Because as I said, the process is going to be different for every student. The final project is going to be different. So how can you kind of help guide them? How can you grade them? How can you see what's going on? And the answer to that is journaling. Now, from a virtual standpoint, there's two different methods of journaling. There is blogging and there is a video diary. If you haven't already looked at Flipgrid as a resource, it is an amazing website to use for video diaries and also for students to give each other feedback. It is completely free. It is through Microsoft, but you can log in with Google. So it follows all the child privacy laws and everything like that. So if you're going to look at video diaries, definitely look at Flipgrid. If you are going to be looking at blogging, there are a bunch of different options. So Blogger is part of the Google suite. It is owned by Google, and so your students' Google accounts would work in Blogger. Other options for blogging would to just have the kids make a blank Google Doc, put a date, put a little entry, put a date, put a little entry. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a full functioning website blog. It could just be a digital journal. So now, as I mentioned before, part of the issue with STEM at home is what do the students have access to? But so before we even look at project ideas, before we even look at final result ideas, we have to think about what do they have access to? Now, there's also becomes the issue of things that back when we were in the school buildings and we weren't in all of these crazy times, were completely easy to reach. Spaghetti. Everybody could find spaghetti pretty easily. Paper towel, toilet paper. Those are things that 2 months ago, you wouldn't have even thought twice about asking your students to use it for a project. Now, however, parents aren't going to the grocery store every day. If they are going to the store every day, there might not be those items in stock. So what can we do for the students to help them so that nobody has to worry about that inequality of not having access? We also have to consider the digital access. We have to consider the access to outdoors. Students living in Center City, Philadelphia are going to have a much different outdoors than students living in Delco or Montco. Or if we're going to go outside of Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey, etc. So these are all things that you have to keep in mind regarding your own students. What do they have access to? What might be difficult for them to have access to? Now, I want to do a challenge, but this challenge was actually from my first webinar, and I'm going to give you guys a different one. So in the chat box, I am giving you 1 minute. Come up with as many possible uses as you can for recycling a plastic bag. I want to see and show you how easy brainstorming, this is what your students might be going through. So we're going to start the timer for 1 minute. And again, as many items as you can think of that you can make out of a plastic bag. Go. Collecting things, crumpling it up for balls, sorting, parachutes. All right, let's see what else we come up with. So as you can see, there's a bunch of different ideas. You'll notice in the pictures on the slide, I have a nice little stuffed animal made out of the plastic bags. We have the parachute option. And then this right here is actually a really clever one. The person took multiple bags and braided them. Now, what's really cool about that is on Earth Day is when I normally actually did this plastic bag challenge. And there is a book out there of a South African community that took all these recycled bags that were just coming in through the ocean, and they cleaned the bags, they braided the bags, and they started making wallets and bags and selling them to raise money for their small community. And it became a big thing. It's all over the internet. If you just type in plastic bag recycle, you will find all of these different ideas. But these are just some of the type of things that we're referring to right now when we talk about what do the students have at home, and we want to give them this open-ended challenge. You say to the kids, take 5 plastic bags and maybe tell them they can use a foot of tape or 3 feet of yarn. See what you can make out of it. And you'd be amazed how they're all given the same raw materials, and yet none of them will come up with the same idea. All right, a few of them might come up with parachutes, but overall, you'll get a lot of different ideas from your students, and it really is amazing to see the brainstorming that goes into it. So I want to show you this website here, and this is a great resource. It is called Design, and I will be giving you the link to it. It is in the bit.ly that I have created underneath STEM challenges. So I just put the link in the chat box for you. It's the bit.ly visual sound 031. And what's really cool about this resource, this one is called Design. And as you can see, this is just a screenshot of it, but you can select your category and then just click New Challenge. And it randomly generates a STEM challenge for your students every time. Now, if you want to make sure your kids have the materials that they need for the challenge, under categories, you can go just to create and draw. This is going to be for prototyping where no other material besides a piece of paper and a pencil is required. Now, if you go on to the build and engineer or the inventions, they may need cardboard. They may need a 3D printer. It depends on the project. But you could always just hit New Challenge until you find one that works for your students. As you can see, this sample says playing cards and wire. They might not have access to that stuff at home, but they could always draw. How would you make playing cards and wire into a train station? And they can either go on to like tinkercad.com and 3D design the train station out of rectangles, or they can draw pictures. So they can do a lot of different things. And again, it's all randomized challenges, so nothing requires that special equipment. Here's another randomized challenge from the website. Invent a sustainable focus tool to rescue injured hikers. So again, this is a very easy challenge. It has no materials required because the kids can come up with anything based on what they have in their homes. If they don't have anything, they can just draw the pictures. So that's the reason why I really like this. You'll notice also in the pull down, STEM education is a pull down because this website was originally created by 2 engineers that were applying for a job at Google. And if you've ever seen the movie The Internship, you'll know that Google is known for their wacky interview questions. So the whole point of this challenge of this website, they designed it for their fellow engineers to help practice answering those off the cuff crazy questions. Then they realized the academic value of it and turned it into this website now that has STEM education specific topics. If you don't pull down the menu for STEM education, You are going to get some really high level programming coding type of challenges. Unless you're teaching like AP computer science at the senior level of high school, they're not going to be things your students can easily accomplish. So this is one of my favorite projects that I do with students sometimes, and that was the indoor composting and gardening, because every household right now is going to be getting kitchen scraps. I don't care how good you are at using every little piece of everything you buy, you're going to have those scraps. So, what can a kid do in their household? Can they, for example, regrow celery from the stem or regrow scallions? K cups are actually really good gardening starters because coffee is high in nitrate to begin with, which is what is in a lot of store-bought gardening tools. I can't think of the word all of a sudden. Not the compost, but see, I'm drawing a blank. I apologize for that. But nitrate is in fertilizer. That's the word. Nitrate is in those fertilizers. So you can use those coffee grinds in the K cup to start your growing for your students. Or let me say, to have your students start those growing. They can try to take the seeds of an apple, dry them out, and then plant them, see if they can get something to grow. Lima beans, they can try to grow those. They can try to grow the seed of an avocado, starts to grow roots if you put it in water. So there's all different things that they can do just with the remaining produce. What's left in their kitchen? See if they can start a garden in their house. So those are some really easy things. And it also like lets your students see recycling. It lets them see the the life cycle, all of these different things. This is my personal, I always did this with my students when I was in the classroom, and that's called the Passion Project. Now, I do have a YouTube video on the next slide that I'm not going to play the video for you just because the sound doesn't always work correctly when trying to stream videos on Google Meet, but the link for that is also on the bit.ly. And the Genius Hour is also referred to as Moonshot Thinking. The main concept of moonshot thinking is when JFK back in 1967 made that speech that we're going to the moon, we didn't have spaceships built. We barely had airplanes at that point. But he didn't say he didn't say we're going to try. He said we're going to do it. And that's the whole point of moonshot thinking. It's take that craziness and make it a reality however you can. Don't just dream of something, make it happen. So when you give your students a passion project or a genius hour, you're basically saying to them, what are you passionate about? If they're passionate about basketball, maybe you can have them create a podcast or a YouTube channel on how to improve basketball skills using physics. How much air in the basketball affects the bounce, how much distance from the hoop or the angle of the hoop. They could just give them that basketball passion and throw some math into it, throw some science into it. If they like cooking, tell them to try making chocolate chip cookies, but substitute baking soda for baking powder or brown sugar for white sugar, margarine for butter. Have them just redo the same thing in different ways and see what's best. Have them experiment. The whole scientific process of trial and error can come out in so many different things. And when you are giving your students the opportunity to use their passion, it's really going to help them to feel encouraged to work. Right now, I don't know your specific schools, but I know a lot of schools out there are doing one of two things. They're either doing pass fail or they're not doing grades at all. And if that's the case, then we need to find that external motivation for students to still want to learn. I know in the perfect world, we all say, oh, kids want to learn because they just want to learn. And some of us might feel that way. I know I personally am always trying to learn new things, but not every student feels that way. So we need to find what motivates them so that we can really help them succeed and not fall backwards during this whole lockdown. And especially when going into the summer months, help them to figure out what they can do. So this is the YouTube video. And as I said, it unfortunately is not going to play very well on the webinar, but the video link is in the bit.ly so you can watch it yourself. It's called Moonshot Thinking. And again, it talks about JFK talking about going to the moon. And it also, the example that they give in the video is talking about cars. If you have a car that's currently going 30 miles a gallon and you want it to get 35, there's a little bit of tweaking that can go on. But if you want to get 100 miles to the gallon, you can't tweak the engine. You have to start from scratch and build an entirely new car. And that's also where our auto mechanics are going right now. How can we remake the system? Start from scratch, build something new. So that's the concept of this moonshot thinking. It is an amazing video. I recommend you watch it and share it with your students because it is definitely the type of thing that's going to encourage that out of the box thinking. So the last thing that I'm going to mention is a resource that we sell here at Visual Sound. It's called Stemfuse, and it's really great because it has cross-curricular lesson ideas that work with so many different options. Now, as you can see, these three samples that I give, the potential and kinetic energy, have your students build Rube Goldberg machines. Have them label the parts. Have them say, well, I made a spring out of a broken pen and I made a pulley system out of the training wheels on my brother's bicycle. Make sure your kids have their parents' permission before breaking apart their brother's bicycle. But there's so many different things that they can do with those Rube Goldberg machines. If you're going to do Rube Goldberg, I definitely recommend checking out the OK Go video, which is a really fun Rube Goldberg machine that they just basically splash paint on themselves throughout the entire song. For prepositions, they have float the boat. So it is an English lesson in the actual lesson plan that Stemfuse provides, but float the boat is create a boat out of materials in your household and see how much weight it could hold before it sinks. So I would say this one, you'd want to tell the kids, hey, do it in the bathtub because they don't want to make a mess of their whole house or in the kitchen sink. But they can build a boat out of basic materials that they have in the house. It could be recycled materials, brand new materials, and see what happens. See how much weight they can hold. If you've ever watched Mythbusters, they actually made an entire boat out of newspaper and they sailed on it. So that it doesn't even have to be something that's considered waterproof. They can try different materials and see what happens. The last sample from Stemfuse is gravity. They have, I just put the menu over it, but plunging parachutes. So as you saw when we did the plastic bag icebreaker, you can make a parachute out of a plastic bag. Well, what other materials in your house can make a parachute? Tell the kids, I almost can guarantee every household has at least one book, I hope. Tell the kids to take a Harry Potter book and see what kind of parachute they can make to make the book fall slower. Doesn't necessarily have to be Harry Potter. It could be the phone book, if those still exist. It can be a textbook that maybe they took home before the school closures. Any book. Just try to get all your students to use the same weight. That way, when they're comparing their parachutes and their materials, obviously they want to be able to compare apples to apples and not apples to bananas. So this is what Stemfuse looks like, just to show you. As you can see, this is elementary school. It gives you a STEM challenge, a coding challenge, and a 3D design challenge for every single concept. And that's the reason why we really like it at Visual Sound. Again, the preposition challenge is that building the boats, but they do tie it into prepositions and language arts. So right now, I want to open up the floor to discussion, and I also want to open up the floor to questions. So you can feel free to come off of mute. You can type in the chat box if you'd like. But this final 10 minutes is kind of just to keep talking about the passion, what we can do for our students. One thing that I didn't mention in the presentation, but that we do want to take into consideration for our students is how do we assess these projects? So most of you would probably look at rubrics. Most of you would probably look at different ways of grading. But what method have you found successful? Do you find that waiting until the end and giving them feedback after they're finished, or do you find it good to continue giving feedback throughout the entire project? Have you ever looked at the 1-point rubric, which is again linked into the Visual Sound 031 Bitly? A 1-point rubric is basically, instead of saying, here's how you can fail, it's saying, here's the goal. And then you just give them 1 point of how they succeed and 1 point of how they can improve. So everyone needs improvement. Nobody's perfect. But the goal of the 1 point rubric is not to say you got zeros in everything because you didn't meet the goal. It's to say, here's the goal. Here's one way you can try to reach it. Here's 5 ways that you succeeded it. And that's the point, is so you're not starting with the here's how you can fail. Because that's one of my biggest pet peeves about a rubrics is when you start looking at the excellent, the okay, the needs improvement, when you're listing those need improvement parts of the rubric, you're basically saying from the get-go, here's how I expect kids to fail. And we don't want to say that because failure is part of learning, but it's also something that can really make the kids not want to continue trying. So someone just wrote, I provide a rubric at start, check-ins during the middle and at the end. And I like the 1 point rubric. So the one, like I said, the 1 point rubric is linked on that visual sound bit.ly. I could actually pull up the sample of it for you to show you. I do like how you said you check in during the middle. Now, when you check in during the middle, is that leaving feedback on a Google Doc, or is that having like a one-on-one discussion with the students halfway through a project? I'm just curious what your check-ins look like because everyone's check-ins look differently. And especially now with virtual learning, the process of check-ins is so much more important than it was when you saw your students every day in the classroom and you can just really quickly say something fast to them. Typically on the Google Doc and if we're in class, a one-to-one. Excellent. See, I love hearing stuff like this. So in the bit.ly, if you go to assessment resources, that's where you're going to find that that 1 point rubric. It's going to be coming, and it actually comes from the website Cult of Pedagogy. I'm not sure if you've seen that website before. It is not research-based. It is research-based, but it's not like a PhD level research. There's no real peer review on it. It's just a website that was created by a bunch of teachers and has kind of built from there. So again, it is a great resource and I love their stuff, which is why I always reference it. But I just want to point out that it is not peer reviewed pedagogy. It is let's get started and see how we could help our own students. So here's what the sample would look like. And as you can see, it just has 1 point. So you're not starting with a rubric that says, here's how to get 100 and here's how to get a 0. You're just starting with a, here's what I want to see. And then telling the students how they meet or need to meet that area. So for example, this one would have been great for this weekend for Mother's Day, breakfast in bed. And the standard. Is the food the correct temperature, adequately seasoned, and cooked to the eater's preference? Well, did the food taste good? Or should they put more salt on it? That's how you could exceed or fail. But it even says cook to the eater's preference. It's really hard to grade something like that because who's the eater? Does the chef know going in, I am cooking this for my mom, I'm cooking this for my dad, I'm cooking this for my teacher? So by not having those 4 points and only having the one criteria, it makes it easier for the student and it also makes it easier for the teacher differentiation wise because the teacher can see where the student's starting from and saying, hey, you have never scrambled an egg in your life. This egg is really dry, but it's cooked. Versus your dad is Gordon Ramsay. You should know how to make a scrambled egg, and this is water. So it gives you a little more flexibility as well on the grading when it comes to the individual students. The presentation, as you see in the sample, it says food is served on a clean tray with a napkin and silverware. Some decoration additions may be present. You're not mandating 2 pieces of decoration. You're not mandating a white plate and a white napkin. This again gives you that flexibility, especially when you're teaching from the internet and your students are at home. They're not going to all have the same supplies. So to give them all the same grading for presentation might not work right. So again, this is the 1-step single point rubric. There are also some times where you do need to give them those points because you need to have that differentiation. Suzanne, how can I get professional development hours for this? So, because this is only a half hour, and I'm not sure what state you're based out of, I can't provide Act 48 credits in Pennsylvania. If you, however, need like proof for a principal or something that you attended a webinar, I can provide you with a certificate that just says, like, Suzanne attended STEM projects from home on May 11th with the time stamps on it. So if you'd like that, I believe you gave your email address earlier in the chat. So I can email you something if you would like. Again, I can't give actual Act 48 or whatever state you're in. That would be up to your school to determine if they can provide you those credits. So do I have any other questions? I hope that I gave you some good ideas and some good resources that you can use. Like I said, teaching STEM, it's very much about the open-endedness and the letting the kids explore. If you've ever seen the acronym for the word fail, first attempt in learning, I really believe that. And I think it's one of the things that our students are just so afraid of these days. So give them this time when everything is pass fail, when there are no consequences for not being perfect. Let them know that perfect doesn't really exist and it's just being the best that you can be. And that's the goal for students. And I hope that this has been helpful for you. I will stay on for a few more minutes to answer any more questions that come up. Thank you all for attending, and I hope to see you in another webinar soon. I do have office hours every day if you have specific questions that you would like help with. Are there any specific projects for math, algebra, and geometry? Oh, excellent question. So specific projects, not that I could think of off the top of my head. For geometry, you can definitely take some of the engineering challenges and give them specifics that have to do with shapes. So if you've ever built a bridge, you probably know that the strongest shape is going to be either a triangle or an arch. So you can give your students a challenge to build a bridge that can hold the weight of five textbooks. Or you can give them, I don't know if you've ever done the paper tower challenge, but tell them to take three pieces of newspaper and build the largest tower they can, and let them see that those different shapes really do impact the strength of the structure. You could also, for geometry, have them do a scavenger hunt outdoors. Give them a list of things. Maybe say, find me a 90-degree angle, find me an obtuse angle, find me a polygon, find me a pyramid. Have them go out and take pictures of all of those shapes and submit them. If you haven't tried it before, there's a great scavenger hunt app called Goose Chase. They have a free version and a premium version. It is an educational app. You, as the teacher on the website, would create the scavenger hunt, and then your students would be able to go in. They see the clue, for example, find me a right angle. They go in, they're walking around outside their house, they see a right angle, or in their house, they take a picture, it submits, and they can get points. So it becomes a competition who can find the most shapes or who can find the most angles. For algebra, maybe talk to them about helping their parents figure out serving sizes, having them figure out unit prices, all of those type of things. Connect it to the real world, because right now, more than ever, students need to see that these concepts, algebra, geometry, they're not just in the textbook, they're part of life. And so if we can relate it to that. Another thing for geometry, if you went to my virtual field trip lesson webinar, or if you go onto the bit.ly to look at the recordings, Google Maps. You could actually have them do geometry in Google Maps. Find me the straightest point from A to B. All right, now find me how you would have to go if you need to follow real roads. Have them map it out, have them measure, have them look at the difference between when they zoom in, how a mile could be an inch and a mile could be a foot. So all of those different things would throw in algebra and geometry as well. So there's a lot of different things. if you go back to that STEM design website, you will definitely get some ideas for geometry, all of the different structures in the builds. Rube Goldberg machines are great for geometry as well because maybe you just give them point A and point B. If you haven't done it, another great one would be mini golf. Tell them to set up a hole that is like 70 degrees from the starting point and build a mini golf hole so that they can get a hole in one. Have them build structures around their house. If you want to look on YouTube, because there are some great video examples, they use a broom. I've seen samples where they're using right now, they're doing on a TikTok, they're actually doing the fake Olympics. And I've seen bowling using toilet paper rolls and soda cans. And I've seen curling where somebody made a circle with masking tape on the ground and they're using a broom and they're pushing stuff to try to curl. So you can turn anything into a math lesson. It's just a matter of what materials those students have. And again, giving them that freedom to explore it. You are very welcome. If I find any other math specific resources, I will definitely add them to the bit.ly for you.